This is a Hog Sports Network podcast.
Welcome into the Whole Hog Football Podcast. I'm Matt Jones, joined today by the Hall of Famer, Bob Holt of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. A little bit of, appropriately, the Mizzou grad and the U of A grad here for Arkansas-Missouri week, Friday afternoon. The Razorbacks are going to play the Tigers at Razorback Stadium. A 3 o'clock kickoff this year, a little bit later than Arkansas's Black Friday games have been in the past. And we'll talk about that game. Plenty to talk about coming up here a little bit later in the show. But first, Bob, the news of the week is that Sam Pittman is being retained as Arkansas's football coach. I thought the timing of that news was a little curious. But as I've thought about it more throughout the week, I think it's kind of like you look at this like a stabilizing of the markets, so to speak. He's got to go out and he's got to find an offensive coordinator. They've got to have a good recruiting period in December, whether it be transfer portal, whether it be, the high school class that they're trying to retain. And I think this is probably just a matter of Arkansas's AD, Hunter Yurchek, trying to get out there and say, hey, I'm going to stand behind my guy for next year. And now I think that, that it's meant to help him go out and try to recruit people to campus next year, whether it be an offensive coordinator, whether it be players.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this day and age where the portal opens basically as soon as the season's over, the signing date, early signing date now is in December, and there used to be a signing date in February. You could hire a coach or make a decision on a coach, in early December. But, you saw A&M fire a coach, you saw Mississippi State fire a coach to get out ahead of the game. And if you're going to retain a coach, I mean, Sam Pittman himself said all the speculation was killing recruiting. And so, Hunter Yurchek can privately assure Sam Pittman and the coaches can assure the recruits. But it's not the same as when the AD comes out very publicly with a strong statement. So, people can disagree with it, they can agree with it, but I think it was a good move. You either, back your coach now and make that very clear, or you make a change. And so, obviously, they're not going to make a change. And so I think the right move was to express strong support for Sam Pittman so that he can, like you do the things that, as you alluded to, that they need to do to try to, get this program turned around.
I wrote it this week. It's very rare for a coach to come back to an SEC program when they've had a losing record and no bowl game in year 4 or later. You go back to Houston Nutt when he was retained at Arkansas after the 05 season. They went 4-7. They had gone 5-6 the year before. He gets retained. They come back in 06. Since that point, there have only been 6 SEC head coaches, and Sam Pittman being number 6, who have been retained when they didn't make a bowl game in year 4 or later. It's a very short list. A couple of Vanderbilt coaches, Bobby Johnson's one of them, Derek Mason is one, Jimbo Fisher at A&M was one of them last year. I'm trying to think, Will Muschamp at South Carolina was one of them. And then one of them, a little bit of an outlier, in fact, a really big outlier, Gary Pinkel at Missouri. His first season in the SEC, they come in and they go 5-7, don't make a bowl game. It's like year 12 or 13 for him at Mizzou. Obviously, they weren't going to fire him after moving to a new conference. But it's a very short list, and it just goes to underscore how patient I think Arkansas is being with Pittman, because you just don't see a lot of teams exhibit this kind of patience. You mentioned Mississippi State a second ago. They fired their coach, 9 games, 10 games into the season?
It was 10 games into the season. Of course, that was an odd situation because, Mike Leach, tragic passing last December during bowl prep, right in the middle of the portal time and right before National Signing Day. So I don't think Mississippi State really had a choice.
Well, they were in an AD search, too, at that point. It was kind of a similar deal
to
Morris being hired at Arkansas.
It was a very weird deal. So I think they did what they had to do and promoted Zach Arnett, but he was 37. He changed the offense. Obviously, had to bring in a new coordinator because Mike Leach called the plays, and I think everybody could see it wasn't working very well, though they did come in here and beat Arkansas. But in terms of showing patience with Sam, that is kind of old school because you used to see coaches get a little bit more time. But you're right, like you look at Brett Bielema, he had, the first year they were 0-8 in the league, and I think 3-9, and then they got a little bit better, 7-6, 8-5. But they were falling back by his 4th year with that blowing a big lead at Missouri, blowing a big lead in the bowl game, and he went into that last season in kind of a precarious situation. But I think you look at the, COVID puts a little bit different thing on it, but Sam, I really think that first year when they went 3-7, and we know they should have been 4-6 because the refs blew the end of the Auburn game.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought that was one of the best coaching jobs anybody's done in the SEC in a while because, it was a COVID year. They were playing. That's the toughest schedule in school history. 10 SEC games, and they added Georgia and Florida. I remember watching that and just being floored that they gave Arkansas, Georgia, and Florida. Are they trying to kill Sam or something? And so. And then the next year, obviously, a lot of things fell their way. They stayed pretty healthy, went 9-4. Last year, just a lot of tough losses. And I didn't really think 7-6 with all the close losses and KJ being banged up and missing a couple games. I didn't think it was that bad, but I'm not a fan either. And this year, I think I predicted them in my head to go 7-5. And they obviously aren't going to do that, but they've been close. And the Auburn game, they laid an egg, but the next week Auburn lost by 21 at home to New Mexico State. I think that speaks to teams can have a really good game like Arkansas did at Florida, like Oklahoma State won Bedlam. The last time they're going to play OU in the foreseeable future, they went to UCF, and Gus Malzahn beat them 45-3, I think. So sometimes teams can have a really big emotional win like Arkansas did at Florida and come back and they're just not ready to play. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's unique to Arkansas. I think as we're seeing it happens. But I think Sam's done a lot of good things, and you have to also realize the program, how far down they were. I mean, they weren't in the ditch. They were in, like, the bottom of the Grand Canyon. They were like some hiker that went down the bottom of the Grand Canyon and was lost and was dying of thirst and needed, a helicopter to come in, and rescue him or something. And so I think when you look at what there's definitely minuses this year, but I think there's a lot of pluses in the column for Sam Pittman. I think Hunter Yurchek wants to give him a chance to rectify the situation. And now if Nick Saban was banging at the door to take the job, or Kirby Smart or something, but Sam was the one guy that really wanted this job. And I don't know. I'm not saying they couldn't probably get some young coaches who've done pretty well, but I don't know that there's not a sure bet guy out there, and so. I think it's probably prudent to give Sam another year. You don't have to do the buyout money. They're probably, they can apply money to NIL, which is a big deal now. And so I've got no problem. And again, I'm not a fan, but I've got no problem with them showing some patience with Sam Pittman. You allude to Gary Pinkel. Of course, he'd built up some capital at Missouri with some success in the Big 12. But his first year, they were, I think, 5-7. Next 2 years, they won the East, won 10 games. So, you look at what Kentucky, and I don't know about, Mark Stoops is getting some heat at Kentucky now, which he's kind of his own worst enemy because he raised expectations. But he's going to 8 straight bowls, and there's some people that are upset because they didn't win 9 games or whatever. If they beat Louisville, they'll be happy. But, he came in at the same time Brett and Gus did. Mm-hmm. And, obviously Auburn didn't show a lot of patience with Gus, even though he averaged about 8 wins a year. But at Auburn, that's not satisfactory. And then obviously, Arkansas fired Brett. But, Mark Stoops, I think that's an example. Like Houston Nutt being 10 years at Arkansas, Mark Stoops 11 years now at Kentucky, he's really, to me, brought that program up to a different level because he took over, a really down situation at Kentucky.
I want to talk about Kentucky for a second because I think it's a very you can make an interesting comparison, I think, between Kentucky and Arkansas from a football standpoint. I want to go back to the COVID season. You've had these conversations with Hunter, and I have too. He does not consider that COVID season to count against Sam. And then I think that's reflective in the buyout in his contract, that if he were to be fired, the record that would determine does he get 75% of what he's owed or 50% of what he's owed is his record post-2020, so beginning with the 21 season. So we talk all the time about this is year 4, this is year 4. I think that in some ways, yes, he's been here for 4 years, but his boss, Yurachek, sees this as really being year 3.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I know 3-7 feels like, wow, 3-7, but I mean, I thought that was I don't think Arkansas was favored in any of those games. And they really should have won 4 because Auburn game was just literally taken away from them. That should have been a fumble, and Auburn never should have gotten kicked that game with a field goal. And they barely lost LSU. And the one game they really got blown out. I mean, Georgia, pulled away in the second half, and then Alabama hammered them late in the year. But that was. But I thought Sam and the coaching staff did a really good job, especially when they weren't able to have a normal spring practice or I guess anything.
Any spring
practice, yeah. And things weren't normal in the fall. And when they lost to LSU, I know they were down a bunch of linemen, and they played anyway. They honestly could have opted out of that, but obviously you want to play. But yeah, I mean, I think Hunter is giving Sam, and this is what a good AD should do. He should give his coaches, whether it's football, baseball, basketball, volleyball, whatever ball, give his coaches every chance to be successful, whether that's helping them with facilities, helping them with salaries for staff, whatever that might be. And I think Hunter, and I would commend him for this, he's trying to give Sam everything he can to be successful. And obviously football is the engine that drives the economics of the athletic department. That's pretty much true anywhere. Maybe Kentucky, North Carolina, it's a little more basketball, and certainly men's basketball, does its share here at Arkansas. But, I think, to me, if you're not going to support your AD, then make a change. Don't go halfway. And so I commend Hunter Yurachek for backing Sam Pittman, and we'll see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, they may have to make a change. But I believe it can work out. I'm not, I don't have a crystal ball or whatever, but I can see where they could have a bounce back year.
I mentioned Kentucky, and I want to go back to this for a minute. When Stoops took over at Kentucky, Joker Phillips had been there for 3 years. They weren't very good in any of his years, but his last one, they went winless in the SEC. Stoops' first year, they go winless in the SEC. So obviously, we're not talking an apples-to-apples comparison here to what happened at Arkansas. But there is a little bit of a comparison, I think, that can be made there because Kentucky was really down in the dumps at the point that Stoops is starting year 2 at Kentucky. They go 5-7, 5-7, and then they run off this line of bowl games. Like you mentioned, they have. I feel like at Kentucky, the expectations are probably kind of like they ought to be at Arkansas. You are going to hover somewhere around bowl eligibility. I don't know if that's 7-5, 6-6, 8-4. I don't know what it is, but you're going to be somewhere in that ballpark. And then every few years under Stoops, and I think that this is what is a reasonable expectation at Arkansas. Every few years under Stoops, they're going to go 10-3. They had 10-3 record in 18. They went 10-3 in 21. Who knows how to go next year? I mean, I guess if you look at that, maybe 24 is going to be a good year for Kentucky. But I feel like that's maybe a good place to start with Arkansas, just from an expectation standpoint, is get bowl eligible every year and then have a team every few years that can challenge the big boys.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm saying this half jokingly. Maybe the big mistake Sam Pittman made was going 9-4 his second year. Kind of like I've kidded Houston Nutt about this, about going 9-3 his first year. But people, maybe if you're Nick Saban and you go 7-6 his first year, and then the next year they're in the SEC championship game, and then after that, with Alabama, if this is the 16th straight year they won 10 games, or 10-1. They beat Auburn, they'll probably be 11-1. Well, they will be 11-1. Then they'll go to Atlanta and play Georgia. We'll see what happens. But Arkansas, newsflash, is not Alabama in football. And so, if Sam Pittman or whoever leads them to a 9-win season, you can't say, well, now we're going to win 10, 11, and 12 or whatever. No, that's not how it works. I think I looked this up the other day. Since Arkansas joined the league in '92, so I think this would be 32 seasons. They've won 9 or more games 7 times. And, topping out by Petrino won 11 his last year, won 10 the year before that. Houston won 10 the year they won the West. In 2006, won 9, I think, 3 other times. When Danny Ford won the West in '95, I think they finished 8-5. Of course, they played 11 games then, not 12 like they do now. And then you have the extra games with possibly the championship game in your conference and then a bowl game or the playoffs or whatever. But and then I think it's 12 times Arkansas has won 4 or fewer games, including like 3 0-8s in the SEC and some 1-7s. And so, Houston Nutt, and I know, Houston people may have mixed feelings about his tenure. He won 75 games in 10 years. Even with my limited math skills, I know that's 7.5 wins a year, so that rounds up to 8.
And that was in some years where they only played 11 games.
Oh, yeah. And also he had a 42-38 record in the SEC. He had a winning record in the SEC. That's when they played Tennessee every year most of the time. South Carolina had some good years in there. They obviously were playing the West all the time. Everybody in the West, those 4 A&M got in, Missouri got in, but To your point, I think if you, like you say, you try to have a big year every now and again. Well, obviously, you want to win every year, but it's not realistic for Arkansas to average 10 wins in the SEC. It's just not, And so I think the sooner people come accept that reality, the better. It's just a very hard job. I was talking to somebody the other day about this, and I was going down a little word association game. You say an SEC program, and you tell me if that's a better job than Arkansas. And, there's obviously, Alabama and Georgia at the top, and then probably just below them is LSU and Auburn and Tennessee and Florida, even though they're struggling. But really, Arkansas is the only program they are clearly better than, in my mind, is Vanderbilt. I would put him in there with. I know Kiffin's doing some really good things at Ole Miss, but you think of Arkansas, South Carolina, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Missouri. Those are 6 kind of like you can have a year like Missouri's having. They're 9-2. They're ranked in the top 10. Last year South Carolina won 8 games and almost beat Notre Dame in a bowl game. Arkansas won 9 games 2 years ago, as you alluded to. Kentucky's won 10 games. Kiffin's probably going to win 10 games at Ole Miss for the second time. Mississippi State's had some good years, but those teams are not consistently going to challenge Kentucky or Georgia, for SEC titles, I don't think. And
Alabama or Georgia.
Yeah,
we're not talking basketball.
Yeah, sorry, did I say Kentucky? I got Kentucky on the mind, but Arkansas is probably a top 30 job in the country because of the tradition, the facilities. The fan base, probably NIL now. But if you're top 30, you're maybe 9th best in the SEC, depending on, in a good year, Arkansas, as By Petrino showed and as Houston showed, you can challenge for the SEC and you could win the West. Bobby never won the West, but I think he went 6-2 his last 2 years. Houston went 7-1 in 2006. But, I think people have to be realistic about the expectations and realize what a hard job Arkansas is, and it's mainly because the recruiting base here is so small, and you have to go. This is a really good state for basketball, and obviously you don't need to sign. You don't need to bring in 30 guys in basketball every year in the portal and signees, and so Eric Musselman can recruit some really good Arkansas kids. Like Nick Smith and Layden Blocker, and supplement it with some other national type recruits, and then bring in 5 or 6 transfers. He doesn't have to worry about bringing in 30 guys. I mean, Eric does a great job recruiting, his staff does, but football and every other sports, there's apples and oranges because you got 100 football players.
I think it's going to be a lot more than 30 this year.
Well,
I mean, you think about the signees, they're going to have to overhaul this roster before next season because there's going to be a lot of pressure to win next year. I think they're going to have to bring in a lot more than 30 players. We'll get to some more Arkansas talk here in just a minute. Arkansas, Missouri coming up on Friday. First, we want to tell you the Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kindle King, Design, Display, Signage, KindleKing.com. That's KENDALKING.com.
The Kindle King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omni-channel creative services through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kindle King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
All right, we'll get into some Arkansas, Missouri talk now. We mentioned 3 o'clock kickoff on Friday on CBS over at Razorback Stadium. Missouri has consistently trended toward a 10-win regular season all year. We do these SEC efficiency rankings, and I'm kind of tinkering with the numbers every week. How would they look against Tennessee? How would they look against Florida? Because, 5-6 weeks ago, those were considered games that we thought might be toss-ups. The Florida game ended up being a toss-up where they traded field goals in the last couple of minutes, and Missouri wins that. But all season, they've trended toward winning 10 games. The 2 games that have consistently said they were going to lose were LSU and Georgia, and that's what happened so far. Now they come into Fayetteville. Is it a rivalry game? I don't know, but what I can tell you is it's the end of the year. Weird things happen on this weekend, and you got an Arkansas team now that they know they're going to have Sam Pittman back next year. Maybe there's a little bit of a motivation, a spark that they play, an inspired game. This being, to borrow kind of an often used cliche, it's kind of like their bowl game. Playing Missouri, a chance maybe to knock their season off the rails a little bit. I think Missouri's a better team. I think Missouri should be favored. But it's not going to surprise me if Arkansas goes out and plays a real competitive game Friday and gives them a chance to win, especially not with the way we've seen this series go. It's 7-2 in favor of Missouri. A handful of plays that could very easily be 6-3, 7-2 in favor of Arkansas.
Yeah, I mean, I think Missouri, honestly, they just seem to take the game more seriously. I know Arkansas
They play
fans,
better in the fourth quarter. I know that.
Arkansas fans, to me anyway, sort of act like they're above Missouri, and why do we have to play Missouri and blah, blah, blah. And it's
But Bob, I was looking at this. Missouri, they rank 8th in the SEC since 2012 in the number of wins, and they're only 2 behind Ole Miss. That was really surprising to me. I think that they have played a lot better in the SEC than most people would give them credit for. And I think, part of it's playing in the East. They're playing an easier schedule every year. They get to play Vanderbilt and South Carolina, and Kentucky some of those years was not very good. But that surprised me that they were number 8 in the SEC in wins since the last expansion.
Well, of course, it helps. Like we said, they won the East in 2012 and 2013, I guess it was. And of
13
course,
and 14.
13 and 14. Yeah. Georgia, had some down years, by their standards. Tennessee was sort of wandering around the wilderness for about 15 years. Florida, post Spurrier, and Urban Meyer obviously had a great run there, but they've been up and down. I remember last night I was looking up some stuff thinking, wow, if Florida loses to Florida State, they're guaranteed, they're going to be 5-7. They won't go to a bowl, and they were 6-7 last year. When was the last time Florida had back-to-back losing seasons? Well, actually, this would be their 3rd straight losing season. Dan Mullins last year when he got fired, they went 6-7. And Missouri's held their own. I think maybe some people thought that they wouldn't be able to, punch up to their weight or however that term is in the SEC, but they've done pretty well. I'm sure being the SEC has helped them. I mean, they're in some good recruiting areas with Columbia being right, literally on a major interstate, I-70, right between St. Louis and Kansas City. Gary Pinkel, when he was there, they did a really good job recruiting Texas in the Big 12, and of course they played a lot of Texas schools back then. But Missouri's done, and it's people forget Eli Drinkwitz kind of entered this season on the hot seat. He'd been to 3 straight bowls, but I think they'd been 6-6. I remember writing this in the preseason. They were literally the definition of mediocrity, which I don't necessarily say mediocrity is terrible. That just means you're in the middle. I mean, they've 6-6 is mediocre. 10-2 is good, 2-10 is bad, 6-6 is mediocre. That average. Another way to put it. And but this year they had a lot of players back. They got a lot of older guys came back instead of opting out or going in the portal or whatever. Brady Cooks had a really great year. Cody Schrader, their running back, who's I think is going to win the Burlsworth
He's
Trophy.
Phenomenal.
We'll see. He was at Truman State, which Sam Pittman alluded to. That's if you're from Missouri like I am, that's old Northeast Missouri State in Kirksville.
What do you say was the bowl game that Pitt State played?
The Moila Shrine Bowl. And they played that in St. Joseph, Missouri. And Sam actually had a pick in that game. He was a freshman lineman, and they lost the game. But he scored a touchdown, and it got called back by a penalty. The reason I know that is because a few years ago, people might remember Eric Gregory had a pick against Tennessee. It's kind of a lineman's dream, right, to get fumble recovery is nice, but a pick, by a lineman with those big paws. And so Sam told that story, and because Cody Schrader, I guess I'm going long here, transferred from Truman State to Arkansas, to Missouri, which would be sort of like somebody transferring from Ouachita Baptist to Arkansas.
Yeah.
And he walked on. He'd had a very productive career at Division II, like 3,000 rushing yards. Walked on to Missouri. Had a good year last year. He rushed for about 800 yards. People might remember he had about 80-something against Arkansas. And this year he's just taken off, and he's on scholarship. He's going to lead the SEC in rushing. He's got nearly 1,300 yards. He's a good receiver. It's a great success story, and he's one of 3 finalists for the Burlsworth Trophy. And if I had a vote, which I don't, I'd vote for him. I know Bob Stoops' son Drake is in there, and I honestly can't remember the third guy.
James Madison, defensive
That's
lineman,
right.
James
Yeah.
Carpenter.
And James Madison's had a great year. Well, I guess they did get beat the other day. But, yeah, Missouri's got some – and Luther Burden's done a great job as a wide receiver. Of course, he caught the 4th and 17 pass against Florida, and you just kind of shake your head. How did that happen if you're Florida, if you're not, if you're Missouri? And they've got a really good – Their defense has played really well.
Mm-hmm.
People remember Al Davis, Big Al Davis, as we called him.
Yep.
He's one of the defensive line coaches there. Kevin Peoples, who's a semifinalist for the Broyles Award, it coaches their edge rushers. Al coaches the inside guys. They've got a really good defense. We know they got the thicker kicker. Harrison Mavis, he hit game-winning field goal against, 61-yard against K-State, which to me, that's really where it all started for Missouri, because they'd gotten hammered 40-12 the year before by Kansas State, and they beat them this year on that last-second field goal. It was, 61-yarder, just incredible. And so that's kind of started the revenge tour for Missouri. They avenged that bad loss to K-State. Tennessee embarrassed them the last 2 years, beating them 66-24, and I think 66-28 or something. And so that was real personal for Missouri to beat Tennessee. And then Florida, they'd had some rough losses, although that's kind of been give and take.
Mm-hmm.
And so they beat Florida. And so now they can't it's not a revenge game against Arkansas because, Missouri beat them last year. But I think last year Missouri was 2-4 in one-score games. This year they're 4-0. So that's really been the difference for them is they found a way to win the close games this year. And Arkansas – if Arkansas had been able to win the close games this year like Missouri had, Arkansas could have 7-8 wins, or at least 6, and just hadn't happened.
See that happen a lot of times. Like the teams that can't win the close games one year, especially when they've got a high number of returners, they come back and they are able to win those next years. I can't remember what team it was. Mike Anderson had a team here at Arkansas, though. I think they had like 12 losses by 4 points or less, something, a very high number. And then the next year is the year when they have Portis back and Qualls back, and they should have beaten UNC in the second round of the NCAA tournament, or they came awfully close to it. You've seen that, and I think that may speak well for Arkansas next year, that they've come so close this year. Now, we don't know what the roster is going to look like next year. It's as unpredictable, I think, as ever. In terms of trying to figure out what a team is going to look like next year relative to what they look like this year because of the transfer market. It just changes things so much. But maybe that's a good sign for Arkansas that they can do that. You mentioned a few of these players. I think this is every team's dream, to have a strong quarterback. They've got it with Brady Cook. To have a strong running back. They've got it with Schrader. You mentioned he's got close to 1,300 yards. The next leading rusher in the SEC is Jaden Daniels, the quarterback at LSU. And he's almost 300 yards behind Schrader. He's having an incredible season. Bob mentioned that he's a finalist for the Burlsworth Trophy, which is for the best player who began his career as a walk-on. He's also a semifinalist for the Doak Walker Award as the best player or the best running back in the country. And I don't think he's going to be invited to New York by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm not going to be surprised if he gets some votes for the Heisman Trophy. Some third-place votes, maybe even some first-place votes. Who knows? And then they've got this receiver, Luther Burden, who's awfully good. He's a semifinalist for the Biletnikoff Trophy or the Biletnikoff Award. And I think one of the interesting matchups to watch this weekend is Burden versus Dwight McGlothern. If McGlothern can get on the field, that's been a little bit of an issue with him here lately. But you look at Pro Football Focus, they've got McGlothern as the #1 cornerback in the country. They have got Burden as the #3 wide receiver in the country. So I'm sure Missouri's going to be doing a lot of things to try to get Burden off of McGlothern as much as they can, assuming that they're going to end up on the same side of the field. But if those two ever end up one-on-one, that's going to be the matchup to watch Friday.
Yeah, I think you're right. They move him around a lot. They like to use him in the slot. But, yeah, Nudie, that's Dwight McGlothern's nickname, he can make himself some money with a good showing. And Burden could too. Now, Burden's only a sophomore. But, I think one of the reasons you see so many guys drafted high in the SEC is, one, they're really talented, and the NFL people, I think, respect the recruiting and the development by the coaches, but also they get to see great players playing against each other, whether it's offensive linemen and defensive linemen, or defensive backs and wide receivers, or linebackers taking on running backs, or whatever the case might be. They get to see the best players in the country going at it every week, and so you can go run a great time at the combine or bench press however many reps, but I don't think there's anything like putting out there on tape like, wow, you really locked down that great player, or wow, you really had your way with that lockdown cornerback. And so, yeah, that would be a fascinating, subplot game within the game if those guys are matched up a lot.
These PFF numbers for McGlothern are incredible. He's been targeted 22 times this season, 22 times in 11 games. Now, I know he hadn't been on the field, as much as some other corners might be, but 22 times in 11 games, which tells me that teams are avoiding him. They're avoiding the receiver on that side of the field. 9 of those 22 attempts have been completed for a total of 104 yards. So they complete it. They're not getting just a whole lot of yardage out of it, probably about an 11-yard average there. He's got 3 interceptions in those 22 targets. I don't know that I realized until I really started digging into these numbers a couple of weeks ago just how incredible this year has been for him. But, I mean, these numbers, they back it up. He's got a pass coverage grade in PFF of 92.2. I think if you got anything over an 80, you've got a heck of a cornerback on your hands. He's at 92.2. It's the best in the country.
Yeah, I mean, he was a nice transfer portal pickup last year. I mean, he had a very good season, and he was the guy I honestly thought might enter the draft last year. But he talked to us in the preseason. We don't get to talk to him a whole lot. I guess they're a little worried about what he might say. But, we talked to him. He was the Defensive Player of the Year or whatever in the Liberty Bowl, Defensive Player of the Game in the Liberty Bowl, and I thought he was fine talking to us. But he talked to us in the preseason. I don't know if we've talked to him since then, but he talked about, knowing he needed some things to work on. He wanted to come back and improve his all-around game and, help the team, obviously, and help himself. And I think there's not any doubt he's helped himself. He got, I believe it was a concussion, or at least he was in the concussion protocol after A&M. And, you don't sit there and say, well, yeah, his head's feeling 80%, so we're going to put him out there. It's not quite like having a sore ankle or a sore knee or something. So he sat out for some times. I also, we don't get to watch practice of late, but I heard that he was missing practice time. And as good a player as you are, it's hard to get on the field in games if you're not practicing. Coaches don't want to put players out there who aren't practicing because I think they feel like that sends a bad message to the team, even though we know he's obviously one of their best players. And so it obviously would help Arkansas a lot if he could play and play well on Friday.
Yeah, Pittman said that he missed some practice time leading up to the FIU game. He didn't start, came in the third series, and then he pretty much played the rest of the game. Some interesting injuries in this game. Arkansas is going to be without their top 2 running backs. Rocket Sanders suffered a labrum tear during the game against FIU last week. Rashad DeBenion's out with a meniscus injury. On the Missouri side, there's a couple of interesting defensive question marks. They've got a cornerback named Enos Rakestraw who's questionable this week. They've got a linebacker named Tyron Harper who is a finalist for the Butkus Award. He did not play against Florida. His status is questionable for this week. Kind of an interesting thing about Tyron Harper. I don't know if you realize this. His cousin, and I believe it's Teron. I think one's Tyron and one's Teron. He's a defensive GA at Arkansas, played for Missouri as well.
I did not know that. I'll have to get that in the notes. But, the running back room has really changed for the Razorbacks, but they had already planned to play Isaiah Gustav, a pretty talented freshman who's played, I think he's played in 10 games, but primarily special teams. I think he had maybe 6 carries. But before last week against FIU.
Came out of nowhere against FIU.
Yeah, they wanted to give him some work, and I think they wanted to give him a little bit of work, and then when Rocket and R-Dub got hurt, I think in the first quarter, definitely in the first half. And because Rocket went like 15 yards on the first carry, and that's probably when he got hurt. And he just had a rough year with the injuries. He obviously needs to get healthy. And so Isaiah Augusto, he ended up getting, I think, 14 carries for 101 yards. Looked really good. He was breaking tackles, running tough. Sam said, we asked why it's funny, during the week somebody asked him about younger guys, and I don't think they asked about him in particular, but Sam mentioned him. Yeah, he's a guy that you may see more of, or you may see some of, and then just because of the circumstances with the injuries and because of the way he was playing, he got a lot of carries. And Dominic Johnson, who had a really good year in 2021 before getting hurt in the bowl game, he's had 2 ACLs, tears, and major surgeries.
One-time Missouri commit.
Yeah,
Dominic Johnson.
Yeah, they flipped him. I think Barry Odom, maybe Brad Davis flipped him, or maybe Brad already left. But anyway, he's had a rough go of it. Coming back from knee surgery not once but twice, and so he had a nice run for a touchdown. He hadn't scored a touchdown in 2 years. And so I understand it was Florida International. They weren't playing Alabama or Georgia, but that has to give those running. I think you can tell that it boosted, the confidence in those running backs. Now those guys are going to be asked to carry the load, against Missouri, and we'll see what happens. Missouri's got a pretty salty defense, but I'm really anxious to see how those guys look against obviously a higher quality team than no offense to Florida International, but they're not an SEC team.
It feels to me like for Arkansas to win this game, it's going to have to be the KJ Jefferson show, especially with the questions that they have in the backfield. I know Isaiah Augusta played well last week against FIU. This is a totally different type of deal playing Missouri this week. I think Arkansas is going to have to score some points because I think Missouri is going to score a decent amount of points this week. Arkansas's run defense is not very good. Missouri's got one of the best running attacks in the league. Obviously, we mentioned that Cody Schrader is the leading rusher in the SEC. For KJ, since they made the change from Dan Enos to Kenny Guyton, admittedly they have not played teams that are as good defensively. They didn't play A&M. They didn't play Alabama after the change. They played them beforehand. But, you look at these numbers for him just in terms of what they're doing, getting him carries. Before the change, he was averaging about 10 quarterback runs per game, and this is adjusted for sacks, so this doesn't take the many, many, many sacks that Arkansas has given up into consideration. Arkansas has given up 42 sacks this year. That's the most since the 08 season when they gave up 46. But 10 runs for about 53 yards a game is what he had before the change. Since the change, fewer teams, not as good defenses, 13 carries for 97 yards. This looks more like the KJ of old the last few weeks, and they need him to really go out and play his best game, I think, in what might be his final game at Razorback Stadium. I know that I personally think it will be. He's got the chance for the +1 season to come back next year, although that would kind of surprise me. But this is the game where you can kind of maybe go out and make your mark.
Well, his first career start, I believe, was at LSU at the end of the 2019 season. Yeah. I think he got concussed. I think Arkansas's last three quarterbacks got concussed that year because the offensive line wasn't very good. And obviously the offensive line has had their share of struggles this year. And so, I think KJ needs to be more active. We know he's mobile, but, I think there's going to be more designed runs.
You're going to mention the 2020 game, weren't you?
Well, I was going to say, the 2020 game, he played great. Felipe Franks was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to look up KJ's numbers. He played really well.
I think it was like 274 passing yards, something like 3 or 4 touchdowns.
And they took the lead on a 2-point conversion. Sam rolled the dice, went for a 2-point conversion, and they went up, I guess, 48-47.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Mavis kicked a field goal at the buzzer.
Missouri, and that especially was tough for Barry Odom because he'd been fired as Missouri. He's a Missouri guy, played linebacker there. He was a coordinator, was a head coach. He got fired after they beat Arkansas in Little Rock in 2019. Now, they didn't fire him on the field like they did Arkansas did with Brett, but he got fired the next day, I think. And then I don't think pretty quickly after that, Sam Pittman called him. Well, after Sam got the job, obviously, but. That was a game. KJ had a really big game, and you're right. I mean, I think for them to have a shot to beat Missouri, he's going to have to play really well. But he has played better of late. I think he's definitely more confident with what they're doing now. It seems like he and Kenny, we don't get to see practice, but certainly after the Florida game, I mean, everybody was happy, right? But those guys, that was really, they were really emotional together. And so, I think, and KJ seems. After this late in the season, I know I'm not going to say he's totally healthy. None of these guys are, but he seems like he's in a pretty good place. He seemed really happy after the game the other night. He broke some more records, and they did it in a win. And so, if this is his farewell at Arkansas, then I'm sure he wants to go out on top.
Missouri's a 7-point favorite. You think Arkansas can stay within 7?
I think so. I think, like you said at the start, I think they're going to be I think if Arkansas was playing FIU 10 this season, they probably wouldn't be very excited. You might even have some guys opt out. I don't know, but I think Missouri has a lot to play for. They're a top 10 team. I mean, beating Missouri is not going to change all the tough losses. Not going to send Arkansas to Tampa for a bowl game or whatever, but. I think it could give them a lot of satisfaction. For some of these guys, it's going to be their last college game. For other ones, they're trying to impress pro scouts, whatever the case might be. They might be trying to impress other schools that they want to go in the portal, or they're trying to impress Sam and his staff and say, hey, I want to come back. Here's a reason to bring me back. Look at how well I played against a really good Missouri team. And so I think there's a lot of motivation for Arkansas. It's the they're at home. They haven't played real well at home. When your biggest win at home is over FIU, it's been a rough year.
Yeah.
I think I would put them over Kent State, maybe. But and then Missouri, on the other hand, they've played a really tough schedule here of late. They beat Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And, they played at Georgia, and they had Georgia. They played Georgia as well as anybody has. That game was 27-21. Georgia late. Missouri had the ball, and Brady Cook, who's had a phenomenal year, threw a deep pick, and Georgia got a field goal. But they played Georgia really tough. Obviously emptied the tank there. Beating Tennessee, very emotional for them. And then they had a really tough game against Florida. So they've had 3 really tough, emotional games. Now they got to go on the road on a short week. So I think that all favors Arkansas. And Arkansas is coming off a feel-good win over, granted, FIU. But, and I don't think they're probably as banged up as Missouri might be playing those last 3 games they did. So I think there's some intangibles that might work in Arkansas's favor in this game.
We hope you come to wholehogsports.com before the game. You can read all of our coverage. I've got our keys to watch before Arkansas, Missouri. Bob's going to have a great story on Thanksgiving Day, by the way. This is the last regular season SEC East versus SEC West game. It's not the last one because you still got the SEC Championship game next week in Atlanta. But it's an interesting look at how the East and the West have compared against each other. Bob sourced the story real well, talked to lots of current head coaches, some former head coaches, Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, and others. So hope you'll check that out on Thursday on our website. Next week, Scotty and Ethan will be back here. Scotty's off in the Bahamas getting a tan right now, watching the basketball team play down at the Battle for Atlantis. Ethan's back home for Thanksgiving, so we appreciate Bob stepping in. But we'll be back next week to talk about Arkansas, Missouri. And who knows, we might have all kinds of crazy personnel type stuff to talk about. I have a feeling that next week it's going to get pretty eventful for Arkansas football when you start talking about players entering the portal, transfers potentially coming in. Obviously, you've got official recruiting visits coming up, and Arkansas's got to make an offensive coordinator hire. And I have a feeling that might happen pretty soon to try to stabilize things in recruiting. Again, for Bob Holt, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us. Hope you all have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of the Hog Sports Network. Look for our daily podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. For more Razorbacks coverage, go to wholehogsports.com or follow the Hog Sports Network reporters on social media.